Imagine sitting in a well-lit corporate boardroom, executing what you believe is a standard, aggressive business strategy. Then, without warning, you find yourself facing the very real threat of a prison sentence. That is exactly the situation James Ient and Maharlika Schulze found themselves in. As executives helping to establish a new brokerage firm in the Philippines, they were accused of orchestrating a mass exodus of brokers from their former employer, Tullett Prebon. Instead of filing a standard civil lawsuit to recover damages, Tullett Prebon retaliated against their former executives using the harshest tool available. They pursued criminal charges. This maneuver forces us to test the very limits of the law. Can a private company unilaterally escalate a corporate grievance into a criminal prosecution, attempting to put their rivals behind bars, without an explicit statute that says doing so is a crime? To build their criminal case, the prosecution tried a bit of legal arithmetic. They argued that Ient and Schulze allegedly violated Sections 31 and 34 of the Corporation Code, which govern the fiduciary duties and loyalties of corporate officers. Because those specific sections only outline civil remedies, the prosecution combined them with Section 144. This is a general penal clause, a statutory safety net designed to punish violations of the code that aren't explicitly penalized anywhere else. The fatal flaw in this approach involves a concept called fair warning. A citizen must be able to read the law and know exactly what conduct will result in a loss of their liberty, long before they actually commit the act. Relying on a vague catch-all provision to trap someone in the criminal justice system destroys the predictability that holds a legal framework together. The lower legal authorities couldn't agree on how to handle this. The Makati prosecutor recognized this as a civil dispute and threw the criminal complaints out. But the Secretary of Justice reversed that decision, and the Court of Appeals backed the Secretary, ordering the criminal prosecution to move forward. When the case reached the Supreme Court, the justices had to run a diagnostic test. They needed to determine exactly what the legislature intended, and whether Section 144 was truly built to put executives in jail for fiduciary breaches. The court threw every interpretive tool they had at the statute. They examined the literal text, the structural placement of the clause, decades of legislative history, and even the common law origins of corporate duties. The result of all that digging? The statute remained hopelessly ambiguous. There was zero evidence that Congress ever made a clear, calculated choice to criminalize these specific corporate actions. Because the state was attempting to deprive a citizen of liberty using unclear laws, the Supreme Court triggered a specific constitutional fail-safe: strict construction. As the court notes here, penal statutes must be strictly construed against the state and liberally in favor of the accused. This serves as the structural brake against government overreach. If the law remains murky, even after an exhaustive review of its text and history, the court deploys the ultimate tiebreaker, the rule of lenity. The rule of lenity dictates that courts and prosecutors cannot simply guess at legislative intent. If the law fails to provide an obvious answer, the tie automatically goes to the person standing trial. This connects directly to the ancient Latin maxim, in dubio pro reo, when in doubt, rule for the accused. These fail-safes exist because the power to define what behavior makes someone a criminal belongs exclusively to the legislature. A judge cannot write the law from the bench, and a prosecutor cannot invent a crime out of thin air. Applying these principles, the Supreme Court delivered its final verdict. They granted the petition and threw out the criminal charges against Ient and Schulze completely. Crucially, the court didn't declare corporate poaching acceptable. These executives could still face severe civil penalties, like paying damages or financial restitution. But the court absolutely refused to allow those civil breaches to be upgraded into criminal offenses through implication or creative maneuvering. By shutting down this prosecution, the Supreme Court prevented companies from weaponizing the criminal justice system to settle standard business rivalries. For anyone studying Criminal Law 1, this case establishes a primary definitive doctrine. The existence and scope of criminal liability must be absolutely clear and certain in the text of the law itself. When the legal code is ambiguous, that ambiguity becomes an impenetrable shield for the citizen against the immense power of the state. If the legislative drafting process fails to provide fair warning, the rule of lenity deploys. The government absorbs the cost of its own unclear drafting. In the Philippine legal system, you cannot be thrown in a prison cell by implication. If the law is blurry, the law cannot bite.